Hello,
Hi,
Hey,
how are you?
how you doing?
Uh, considering okay.
that's good. Yeah, good to hear.
Where are you guys? You guys are in
Yeah,
London?
no, we're like southwest of England.
No, we
Where?
are in lockdown.
Oh, I
We're
thought you
in
said in London. Sorry.
we're in a national lockdown.
I
Yeah.
know, I know, I know. I do a podcast called The Future of Photography.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and one of our guys is, outside of London, the other is in Ireland, and the other is in Germany, but that's pretty fucked up.
Yeah, it is.
But here, we don't have a national lockdown, so it's even more fucked up.
Yeah.
Which do you
We
think
have-
you prefer? Would you prefer to be in lockdown, or would you prefer
I'm in
to?
a lockdown.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I actually would prefer to have a lockdown that people actually lock themselves down for a month or so and
Yeah.
get this fucking thing under control because,
Yeah.
but personally, we're pretty locked down for around 7 months. So,
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
that's
my
what
little community.
we would talk about sports every week, and then everything got shut down. So we switched to talking about movies, which is how we've got here. We started kind of ahead of time going through our favorite Christmas films, and obviously no one better to speak to than yourself, who's behind one of them.
Okay, well, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's
I mean,
go.
the first thing we wondered was how tough it is kind of making a Christmas movie, because you've obviously got so many boxes you kind of have to check to make it a Christmas movie, but also not do the same thing that's been done 100,000 times before that people aren't going to be interested by.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm, and I was not then analytical in the slightest, and I'll explain why. Um, First of all, the script, which John Hughes wrote, and was kind of still actively writing as we were kind of moving through the pre-production period and the kind of pre-production period and the pre-production period. So it was based on a short story that he did for the Lampoon. I think it was called Christmas 57, I think. Christmas 50 something. And it was a standalone short story. I don't know if you could track it down and read it, but it was about, someone who has intense hopes and dreams to make the greatest, event, holiday possible, and in so doing, destroys what's left of his family and blowback around the neighborhood and world. So it was, it's a really, really fun, very relatable story, and it's not necessarily one that you can ascribe only to Christmas. I mean, it could be any event, you know what I mean? A wedding, a dinner party, just anything that people, in fact, I'm currently developing a series on people who have their dreams crushed, but refuse to acknowledge what's really happening. And in so doing, upset a kind of a litany of problems. So that the kind of root story was not really predicated on attaching to Christmas. That's number one. Number two, I consciously decided not to watch the first two movies before I made this. So I didn't go into it as a director. Maybe it was more of my ego. You know what I mean? I didn't want to be like, can I have samosa? It was really.
I think I was thinking as well from the takeaway from all of this is from watching it as a kid to then now being an adult and watching it again, you see it from two completely different perspectives.
Well, it's interesting. Yes. By the way, me too, because remember, only recently have I seen the movie in a theater.
Yeah.
Since it opened. Like the night it opened was the last time I looked at it for 20 years.
No way.
And then there was a screening at the Cinematheque here, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, with a Q&A. And then I didn't really see it until it reopened in theaters
No way.
this last season for 2 or 3 weeks.
Brilliant.
And I went with my granddaughter, which was 7, right? And it was a blast to see it. Like I just sat in the theater, you know, but weirdly people recognized me after the film was over, and people started to come over, and
Awesome.
so that was kind of bizarre. It was just at Universal, and my granddaughter was very impressed. She was very impressed.
I'm sure.
Anyway, but the perspective was different. But just to answer your question about the kind of connection to Christmas itself, I didn't look at the first 2 movies because I really wanted to approach it as a standalone film. And so I just went into it just making my own kind of decisions and not really being influenced. And the studio was certainly behind those decisions, and most important, John Hughes was really behind me. And it was my first movie, so having the wind in my back was very, very helpful in just, you know, assuming a certain confidence on set. You know, before that, I had quite a run as a commercial director, so being on a set, and I was making, you know, at the time, big commercials. So it was not an unusual feeling, you know, just to manage a situation like that. The difference was, you know, I had a studio on one hand, Hughes on the other, very, very helpful cast for the most part. For the most part.
I'm sure there's a few stories there to be told.
Well, I've told the story. There was a certain actress, and we butted heads. You know, Beverly and I for most of the making of the movie. I think she was kind of resentful that she wanted to be in it at that time. I'm super fond of her. You know, since then we ran into each other, and then we did some anniversary kind of behind the scenes DVD recording, and the most fun I had was with her. I mean, we just had a blast. So, you know, we both moved on from them, but I wasn't really intimidated by it because I thought if you're going to direct a movie, you got to deal with all kinds of bullshit. So there I went. But the decisions I made aesthetically to Christmas was really just one that I applied a sort of a classicist approach. I did want to make a movie for the ages, though God knows what hubris I had. I mean, it's only, I think, by luck and serendipity that it turned out that way. But I did try to make decisions that didn't feel cool, hip, you know, that kind of visual, like going to the now.
Yeah.
And which was difficult for me because I was known as a commercial director who was kind of like using all of the kind of latest cool toys, long lens, flattened, high cutting pace, all of that. And I purposely slowed it way down.
Yeah.
Studied my predecessors of, you know, Leo McCarey and Billy Wilder and Howard Hawks and Preston Sturges. And they really inspired me to approach a comedy in a serious way.
Yeah. I think that's the best thing about it, is that, like we said earlier, about completely different perspectives from a child's view, from an adult view, but it's just a family's view of Christmas, of all the trials and tribulations that everyone can relate to. And that's what makes it so timeless, I feel, because you can see that, like, parents these days are exactly in the same boat as they were back then, as the Griswolds were. So
Yeah.
it's
Now
brilliant.
it's going to be really tragic because you're going to watch it this year.
This is
It's
what
like,
it used to be like.
that's right. Remember when people came over and remember
Yeah.
when we decorated the tree and all these people, you know, by themselves having their tea.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly
their
that. Gearing up for that this
frozen,
year.
frozen turkey dinners.
Yeah.
One of the things we noticed was the fact that you don't see Christmas Day in this. Was that like a conscious thing, or was that tying in with what you said with it could be standalone there as well? Like you've already seen everything, you've had the ups and downs, you don't really need to see anymore.
I thought so. You know what I mean? Again, it's tribute more to John. That's how he wanted to structure it. I loved it. You know, it's really the buildup because often in our own lives, you guys are younger than me, but you'll see, you'll have a lot of your dreams crushed, and maybe a few of them realized. It could be good, but what happens is the sense of expectation is always really enjoyable. On our podcast, which we recorded yesterday, Adrian was talking about one of the most exciting times for a photographer is when you've ordered your new camera, but you haven't gotten it yet.
Yeah. The anticipation of it all, isn't it?
Exactly. So that really energizes a lot of the conceits and presuppositions of the kind of dynamic tensions within it.
I think that makes loads of sense because Christmas is always kind of, right, we need to get all the presents, we need to get all the decorations, we need to get everything out, everything perfect. And then when Christmas Day comes, it's kind of like, right, chill out for a minute, let's just enjoy it. And that kind of comes across perfectly, I feel, from the film, which is great.
Yeah.
I mean, the opposite of being chilled out, I suppose. You've got the scene with the cat being fried essentially, and I thought that could have gone either way, especially if it was done now. With some people would write off a whole film just because of that one scene. So, was there ever any thinking about that, whether to keep it in, or was it always going to be like a big set piece there and gotta have it in?
Highly controversial. Your question is controversial or requires a controversial answer. It was, you know, it was something that we didn't really pay that much attention to in the script. I mean, it was there and it was just another day of shooting. You know, I figured out how to do it. All good, seemed funny. Didn't seem as funny as it turned out, which is really funny. and I'll get to that in a moment. But so before we went, the studio got cold feet. They did.
Right.
And they encouraged me to remove it from the you know, the show, and I did not want to do it. I thought it was funny, and one thing that I've learned: never cut funny.
Yeah.
You can cut a lot of things, but don't cut funny. So it was in. I said, you know, we'll shoot it. We'll see how it goes. They kind of said, well, I don't know, you know, and I said, I'll tell you what, if you really want to do it, phone John Hughes, who at that time was in Chicago directing Uncle Buck, I think. As memory, I forget, but because he had left me on my own to stumble, and which was great. So I phoned John. I said, the studio's going to call you to do X, Y, and Z. Do not take the call. So they, of course, did it. Of course, he was like so great like that, right? And whenever I'd be on the phone in the conversation with them, I said, well, you did check with John, right? Like I'm real easy to work with. I'll cut it as long as John's coming from John, I'm good. Of course, John, don't do this, right? Anyway, so we left it in. I shot it, and then we did the, you know, the ADR. You know, the sound of the cat frying that sound, that was me in ADR. I made that. I got to the mic. I said, no, I hear something very specific. Okay, we go to preview it. They want it out, right? And I'm sitting next to the head of the studio, and scene starts to play. cat gets fried, huge reaction from the crowd. You don't know
Yeah.
if it's going like, whoa, bad or whoa, good, but it provokes sort of a big audible in the theater. And the studio is like, let's do a cut for our next preview without it. So they read the cards, right?
Mhm.
Favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah.
Number one,
The top.
cat fried.
Yeah.
So that was it. We never took it out.
Yeah.
And we never really got any blowback because it's funny. It's
Yeah.
funny. I mean, how many animal lovers, of which I count myself one, is like, God, don't gnaw on an electrical cord. Right? Anyway, that was that story.
Another story we read was during the scene where Clark's ranting about his boss and he's reeling off kind of every name under the sun, was that you had the cast behind the camera with words around their necks so he could ad-lib. Was that your idea, something you came up with? Because
I think it was,
treat.
yes. I think we needed cue cards because it was a litany. And by the way, I just saw on the web somebody selling a coffee mug with the entire speech etched on it.
Brilliant.
Anyway, it was so well written. Again, a tribute to John, and it was like maybe at least a couple of pages of dialogue, and I really wanted it to go without a breath. I didn't want the kind of actory things where, sometimes you notice we'll go like, "Are you talking to me? Is that me you're thinking of?" They'll repeat stuff in name or in trial of kind of naturalism, but it's not. It's them catching up to the next sequence of words. So I needed cue cards, but I didn't want him to be like that. So the natural way was just to put them all over the place. We needed room for the camera to kind of adjust. And we had a big scene there, remember, on the reverse.
Yeah.
So that's how that transpired. It was pretty fun. And of course he did it just phenomenal.
Awesome. Yeah.
Was that one that took a while to get right with plenty of takes of him reeling that off, or was it?
I don't think so. No, when you have that many cue cards. 2 or 3. and you know your lines. You just want to kind of stay on it.
We also read that when he's in bed reading the magazine, that's you on the cover, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I thought it was, yeah.
Was that your idea, or is it something that someone just comes up with and you go along with it?
It was like, we need something for the cover of People magazine, and it's like, oh, how, you know what I mean? It was one of those last minute, maybe the day got moved up. Nobody really thought. It's like, this is my Hitchcockian moment in my own movie.
Is it tough to shoot a film where you've got kind of so many moving parts in such a small place, because you've got this massive family all in the house, and as much as the lines, you've got each person's reactions, and so is that tough to get right in terms of knowing exactly what you want to do there?
It's brutal. I think it's actually, there are two things that are, in speaking to so many of my colleagues over the years, I would identify the two most difficult scenes technically, where you wake up in the morning and you're like, this is not going to be fun. This is two people facing each other with very little dialogue and a lot to accomplish. Those require an intense amount of trust between the director and the actors, between the actors and themselves, the tone, the mood of the set, how the camera moves, to instill the subtext. So this is like the most subtle dynamic that you can achieve. And when I teach directing, sometimes it's one of the first assignments that I give out is I just put 2 actors in front of a young director, and I just give, I just say, these 2 have come from their parents' funeral and are just seated at a cafe an hour later, and there are no words, and let's make a scene of a minute. And so they're like, what? And you have an hour to do it, right? And so that would be lesson one. And it's like, you see the whites of their eyes. And but the second one is where you have basically the entire population of Chicago sitting around a table.
Yeah.
The technical demands in terms of eye lines, coverage, reactions to who becomes somewhat of a mathematical, aesthetic problem to solve. You've got to be ultra prepared for how that works. If you add to that the regulations and laws about working with children who can only work for X amount of hours,
All right.
when you're working with people who are aged, they get tired earlier, so you want to. When you're dealing with number 1 and 2 and 3 on the call sheet, they want to go home faster, so they want their coverage earlier. When you're working with animals, animals get bored. They do. When they do the same trick over and over again, it's like, I'm not doing this for a cookie. I'm completely full and I don't want to do it anymore. But so you always got to keep them active. So yes, it's very, I want to say that the dinner scene took well over a week to shoot. Yeah, it was long, and some of those scenes in the living room, especially where you have 12, 13 people in a scene, everybody with dialogue and coverage and whatnot. It's it was challenging, and those came early on the studio portion of the shoot. So there was, I had my hands full there.
Yeah, it seemed like it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like yesterday. Honestly, it feels like yesterday. My muscle memory of like being on set there. Also, I had big fights with Beverly at those days too. So there was a lot of tension, but I had a lot of support from everyone and my crew. So I wasn't feeling, and I'm not intimidated. So it's like, you know what I mean? I'm ready to be the director, and if I cannot be, I'd rather leave the show. So
What was Chevy Chase like to work with? Sorry, Jack, because obviously he's very, very big star. Then just going through his IMDb, and so was that a fun experience?
Probably, he was at the top of his stardom, I guess. How was he? I mean, he wanted me to do the movie, so obviously he was. He was very, very good with me. When things started to turn south with Beverly, he started to defend me to her in a way that was super aggressive, to the point where I had to separate. Which is interesting. I think they're doing a little bit, some screenings around the Northeast, the two of them. You know what I mean? So that people are buying tickets to seeing the movie and can converse with both of them. So a lot of that has gone away. But there was a lot of dramatic tension off set for certain scenes. The Shitter's Full scene in particular, because I shot them differently. I was certainly shooting Randy's part staged, and then when I shot them inside, this was at the height of their, I can barely watch that scene, which Beverly is so good in it, because they were literally at each other's throats through the kind of final touch-ups and whatnot. And when I would call action, they both were like, "Hey, Clark, don't you?" You know what I mean? Like, so that's a tribute to their professionalism, both of them. I love them. In retrospect, I wouldn't have had it any other way, since I think it contributed to the grounding that I wanted in the film. If I had to make a choice between funny and emotional, I'd always go for emotional, because there was enough jokes. It's not that I would cut the funny, but I would lean into the emotional, because I knew that if the audience was truly involved, as absurd as it was, in the plight of the kind of father, then I knew I had the audience. And if I didn't, it would be fun and hilarious, like so many comedies we see. And then you're walking out of the theaters or whatnot, and you go like, Indian or Chinese, what do you feel like? You know what I mean? And like, so I wanted it to have a more resonant feel.
Yeah.
A lot of decisions were made based on that.
And that kind of like emotional side of thing that you just spoke about there is what I was going to ask you is which emotionally do you kind of identify with in the film? Is there any like a moment in the film with Chuck where you think that's happened to me plenty of times at Christmas? Like, I just wish it.
Well, the two scenes that I feel I got the audience by the throat and I never let go.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that out of ego. I'm just saying in watching the previews, because
Yeah.
I'm going back where I just thought, I'm dead. I'm never going to direct another movie. The movie's going to fail. This is while I'm watching it next to this.
Really? No way.
This is really good. Oh yeah. They're laughing now, but wait, they'll
Yeah.
turn. But there was two moments in it. The first moment was CHEVY in the attic, watching old movies, all dressed, trapped there and freezing, just alone with that song.
Mhm.
I love that scene. It's my favorite scene in the movie. I loved shooting it. I loved choosing the film. I shot the film, right? The old film. It was fun. I love the classic payoff, the drop down. So, but I knew that at that moment, him alone with his connection to the past, that's a universal.
Yeah.
And so I just love doing that. And I think it's sentimental, but I don't think too saccharine because it pays off with a punch. The other scene where I knew I had, this is the scene during the screening of the movie that the head of the studio, Bob Daly, at the time, turned to me, I turned to him, where we looked at each other and he nodded and it was like, the movie's going to be a hit. Like you just knew after that scene. And that's the scene where CHEVY has tried to plug in the lights several times.
Yeah.
And he makes a very big fanfare and he throws the plug together and nothing happens. And sitting in the audience of say 400 people, everybody went, oh, which is very unusual for a comedy.
Yeah.
Not a laugh. They didn't laugh. They went, oh. And that moment I knew, oh my God, they feel for him.
Yeah.
It was not practice. It just happened spontaneously, but the audience was with him. And that's when I knew. That's when I first relaxed and was able to kind of look at the film and read it, because before, I was just so fucking petrified. You know what I mean? Like, it's your first film, you're sitting, between the two heads of the studio watching the audience decide whether you live or die. And then I knew I would live. So those are the two scenes that's.
Because I think that's as like a Christmas light scene where we've all seen our dads spend all day putting the lights up outside, and you just know it's like the fear inside you that you just don't want it to go wrong, because the onslaught afterwards is just not going to be worth it. And I think that just perfectly encapsulates it in that scene.
Yeah, I mean, it gives me joy that you got, like, how old are you guys?
26.
26.
Okay, like, you have no idea how happy I am that so many generations since I made the film know the film. All over the world. Like if I'm in a taxi in like the Middle East and like somebody is trying to figure out what I've done and movies. Oh yeah, what movies? Well, I don't know if you heard of Christmas. Like, I'm talking like Muslim families, right? Like, we love this movie, right? Because it's the same. With different holidays. So, and again, you hope for that kind of of classicism, but it's so rare that it happens.
Yes.
You know, I was lucky because I made Benny and June, and that also has a resonant, you know, afterlife that is, you know, still infecting young girls even now. So,
Yeah.
but you know, again, a lot of it is the luck of the draw, and you know what you know, I don't know what it is. I mean, I guess if everybody knew, everybody would be an expert.
Yeah.
And every movie would be a hit. So,
Just finally, I wondered if we take your film out of it, if you have a favorite Christmas film that you go to each year yourself.
yeah, Bad Santa,
Nice.
We spoke with
Billy Bob's movie, right?
yeah, we spoke with the kid from it a couple
Oh,
of
yeah,
weeks back.
yeah.
So,
For me,
Great
that's
film.
that is definitely my favorite Christmas movie.
Do you ever go back to National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation though? And I suppose obviously no, you've answered that already, but I would have assumed that you've all gathered round to watch it every year because it's on pretty much everyone's must watch at the Christmas period. That has to go on in the run up to Christmas.
Everyone does. It plays constantly.
Yeah.
You know, I'm often asked for interviews like this to, you know, tell tales and whatnot. I tend not to look at my own work. You know, it's very hard to look at your work and not remember the day, like for me, everything that happened that day, how I was feeling, what was going on behind the scene. And that's how, when I watched it with my granddaughter, it was really one of the very first times that I was able to see the movie objectively.
Yeah.
You know, without really thinking of that, because I was so watching her reaction and the film, and you know, so that but you know, I'm always thinking about what I'm doing next or what stories to tell. And you know, it's increasingly right now, the last 2 years have been very, very difficult in terms of, you know, the writing is good, you have plenty of time to write, but production is, you know,
especially now
hard. Yeah, I mean, I have projects that are just in stasis, they're just waiting to get green lit, you know, so it's safe to shoot. And even if they were greenlit today, I'm like, I don't know if I could go and travel and do this.
Yeah, of course.
Some of my colleagues are doing it, but it's still very risky.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you for giving us so much of your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I hope you have a good Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Won't be hanging any lights this year.
Yeah.
Don't want to attract any COVID bugs.
Yeah,
no.
Definitely not.
Well, you guys stay safe and keep the faith. That's good. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.